Gary, and this is Coasting with Culture, which is all about combining theme park visits and riding roller coasters with various cultural experiences around the world. With summer coming to a close, my hope was to make one last push for some coasters before many parks shift to weekend-only operations or close for the season. This involved heading back to New Jersey, where the year's coaster riding had begun, with a focus on smaller parks in the state, including several parks found on the Jersey Shore. One trip I've had on the back burner for several years was to go and knock out all the parks in New Jersey in one go, with a return visit to Six Flags Great Adventure, as I've enjoyed it a few times. The dilemma I usually faced, though, was that I would have other trips planned, and more recently, because of the new job that isn't quite as flexible as my tour guide position with time off, I haven't had as easy a time putting together and completing long trips. I have, however, found it easy to go for some short trips this year, such as heading to Silverwood for opening day of the season and when Stunt Pilot made its debut, and more recently to Kansas and Myrtle Beach for some new coaster credits. While I had hopes of one day making a trip primarily focused on New Jersey parks, I had already been picking at the state, so to speak, with a visit in January that included stops at iPlay America and Nickelodeon Universe. And I knew there'd be some stops left out this trip because of timing or because they had a coaster that wouldn't be open. So a return visit to Great Adventure and a first visit to Moray's Piers and Clementon Amusement Park will be saved for another visit, as well as a return visit to Nickelodeon Universe for Sandy's Blasting Bronco. That would leave several smaller parks that could be done in an hour or two that could potentially be checked off in the 2 days of my weekend. So that was the plan. Getting the trip started gave me a chance to try something new, as I typically take Lyft or Uber from my place to the airport, if the timing for catching the bus to get to the light rail doesn't quite line up. King County Metro has a service called Via that has been operating in the south side of Seattle for a while. It's essentially a Lyft or Uber Lite where you can use the Via app to get a ride like you would on the other rideshare programs, and for the price of the bus, you can be picked up for a ride to one of the area transit centers or a select few other locations. This was incredibly handy for me because using the bus to get to the light rail and then the airport would usually be about an hour and a half or longer, but this service kept the entire ride from my neighborhood to the airport in under an hour. This is such a great service, and I'm grateful our transit system is trying something new like this. At some point I'll be likely to fly again with Alaska Airlines, but for this trip, it was another excursion with American, making a red-eye crossing to Philadelphia for the start of the Jersey Coaster Hunt. Our flight was a bit late taking off though, as we ended up swapping planes and having to go all the way to the next gate over. But it turned out that wouldn't be our plane either, as they swapped that plane with another, making us go all the way over to the next gate again. This one would be the one to get us to Philly. It was neat to be able to see the skyline of Philadelphia as well as their sports stadium complex when approaching the airport for landing. Since I was in Philadelphia, it felt appropriate to get a Philly cheesesteak as a sort of early lunch, and in part because my Pennsylvanian stepdad recommended stopping by Pat's, a place that claims to have been the originator of the Philly cheesesteak. It's fascinating to see that they have an official process for ordering, and that they have sandwiches handled through a different window than side items and beverages. But there may be something to the efficiency of the operation on busier days. I love to stop by older places with a reputation, although I was told by others this was a bit of a tourist location. The sandwich itself was solid and felt fitting for an arrival into Philadelphia. While my flight was into Philly and started with a local signature food, the main focus of the trip was the neighboring state of New Jersey and trying to grab as many coasters as possible. Things didn't quite start off on the right foot though when arriving to the first stop. When I first put this itinerary together, this was going to be my first stop out of the airport because it's right by Philadelphia. But when I was starting to tinker around with some ideas for possible itinerary layouts, I started to realize that this could be the last stop before flying out tomorrow. And so that became the plan, that I was going to go ahead and head up to Hope, New Jersey to go to the Land of Make-Believe. Well, then our flight got delayed last night, and it was getting to the point where I wasn't going to be able to get to the Land of Make-Believe at opening time, and that was going to push everything back and make it that it would be a little bit of a tight squeeze. So I decided, let me go ahead and put Funplex back at the beginning of the trip, because last I had seen the website, the park opened at 10 in the morning. Yeah, they changed it. Doesn't open till noon. So we're going to have to hold off on it for now. Maybe you'll be able to come back and try to sneak it in before leaving. The only thing, though, is that another hiccup that's occurred is that Hurricane Ida, which had struck New Orleans, is starting to make its way up the East Coast, and there's going to be a bunch of rain and thunderstorms tomorrow from what a lot of the forecasts are calling for. So it's not going to look very good for tomorrow. Today's probably going to be the day to try and knock out as much as possible. So fingers crossed that everything goes to plan for today. Having the new-ish plan in place, the drive continued north to the town of Keansburg for Keansburg Amusement Park. There were 2 coasters at the park I hope to get here, a Myler family coaster called Sea Serpent, and a Pinfari looping coaster called Looping Star. There was a bit of a dilemma though. So this has turned into a massive pile of failure so far. Just arrived at Keansburg, New Jersey here, and the goal was to try and get these 2 coasters real quick, right around opening time at noon, and then continue on down to Jenkinson's. Unfortunately, it seems to be that the park will only have some of the kiddie rides open today, and that both of the roller coasters, the Shooting Star and the Sea Serpent, are going to be closed. So, yeah, this has turned into a very successful day already. 2 stops, 2 goose eggs. While it's never a given that you'll get every coaster on a trip, it was a bummer to have such a bad start. Although with the way things have been going during the pandemic, it wasn't entirely surprising. Best thing to do in this case, shrug it off and continue to the next stop. That next stop would be in Point Pleasant Beach, home of Jenkinson's Boardwalk. Jenkinson's is a larger complex with a variety of restaurants, shops, and attractions along its boardwalk, including their own aquarium. One of the larger stands here is Core's Frozen Custard, a northeast chain of custard stands that started back when Archie and Elton Core created frozen custard in Coney Island to better withstand the humid Atlantic Ocean summer air. It was a nice, creamy, delightful treat to enjoy while strolling along the boardwalk. Of course, the main reason for the stop was to find some coasters, which hadn't been a very successful search up to this point, given that the 2 previous stops were either closed or had their larger rides closed. I was beginning to worry when the ticket booth signage warned that rides were closing periodically because of staffing. Fortunately though, it seemed that only a very few rides were closed at any given point, and the park's 2 coasters were both open when the rides opened for the day. I started with Tornado, their Zamperla powered coaster, which had a fairly standard layout. It was just nice to get that first credit. Their other coaster, Tidal Wave, was a newer model I hadn't yet tried. an SBF Visa 5.0 spinner. The layout feels like they took their smaller figure 8 spinners and stretched them out into a layout similar to a wacky worm. What's a real surprise about this model is the big drop because its profile makes for a quick ejector-esque moment.
So much nicer when you can get the credits that you seek. And that happened here at Jenkinson's, but now it's time to move on to the next stop.
Driving down the road to the next park, you find some really nice homes that are within blocks of the coast. I can only imagine what the market would be for one of these, given their location to the beach and in one of the most populous areas of the country. After a short drive, the next stop was in Seaside Heights, home to Casino Pier. The hope was to get 4 coasters from this park. Unfortunately, their newest ride, Zololoka, an SBF Visa Big Air Coaster, was down as they seemed to be working out the kinks for their new attraction. This did leave 3 other coasters to be ridden, including a smaller coaster, Hot Tamales, that sits within Zololoka, and a rather unique ride from Wisdom, Pirate's Hideaway. This single cart coaster starts with a spiral lift, going into a couple quick drops, then enters the interior portion of the ride, which is actually just a sort of empty building.
So can I just say that while Pirate's Hideaway is a little bit jerky in spots, it's such a weird but fun ride. In a way, it almost feels like a condensed version of the gold mine that was over at Rainbow's End in Auckland, New Zealand. And just kind of a fun ride. It's almost like a wild mouse mixed with a wacky worm, in a sense, the way that it's laid out, has the dips, but has some pretty curved tips to it. I like it. I wish there were more of them. More people need pirate hideaways. Isn't that right?
I had a hunch that Casino Pier's biggest coaster would be a solid ride. Hydrus is a Gerstlauer Eurofighter, which was the first of the 320 version. As the season after it debuted, Oaks Amusement Park in Oregon opened the second of this version, and that is a personal favorite from my neck of the woods. Hydrus' experience is essentially the same, with some great hang time in the loop and a fun airtime moment or two mixed in, but the major difference between this ride and Adrenaline Peak, Hydrus' oceanside placement, which isn't far from the location of an infamous photo subject.
You may recall several years ago when Superstorm Sandy hit New Jersey in the Northeast Corridor that there was that roller coaster that had collapsed into the Atlantic Ocean. Well, as you may or may not know, this is the pier where that happened. So in those waters, at one point, there was a roller coaster sitting there, and it had sat there for a while until they had the ability to go ahead and dismantle it. But it was one of the most symbolic images from that storm of the devastation caused by it.
Exploring more of Seaside Heights Boardwalk offers a number of shops and restaurants, and a few businesses that can take you on a tour of locations from the popular MTV show Jersey Shore. I'll admit, the show wasn't my cup of tea, but I was really fascinated by what was in the sky just further up the shore from Casino Pier. There was a special display of kites of various sizes called Kites in the Heights, and it was incredible to see just how large some of them were when compared to people walking near them. You certainly need a good breeze for a bird of that size to stay in the sky. From Seaside Heights, it was about an hour to Beach Haven for the next stop, Fantasy Island. This is a really nice smaller park with a decent selection of flat rides, plus their coaster credit, an SBF Visa spinning coaster. It was just a quick stop for the coaster though, because there were still a few stops I hope to make before the end of the night. Based on the hours of the last few parks, I went to Ocean City next to hit Gillian's Wonderland Pier. Like many traditional seaside parks, this place offers a fun nighttime atmosphere from the lights on the rides, and there was another credit to obtain in their Wacky Worm. While the coaster wasn't anything to write home about, they did feature a few other rides worth checking out, including their classic 1926 Philadelphia Toboggan Company Carousel. They also have a haunted house dark ride that has a lot of blacklight paint, but that gave it much more to see than other similar dark rides found at smaller parks. What may have been the star attraction here, though, was their Hopkins log flume called Canyon Falls. For a small park log flume, it has a decent-sized drop that creates a rather large splash, and because of the layout of the flume, if your log happens to be in the right spot when another log drops, you'll get annihilated with water, just as I had because of that very situation. It also has a bit of a fun theme involving gnomes in a mine. Gillian's Wonderland was a nice surprise, and the next stop was right down the boardwalk from it. While it was neat to see the boardwalk all lit up, the atmosphere had an even more fun flair to it thanks to the Uptown String Band visiting from neighboring Pennsylvania. It was neat to see their colorful costumes and hear some catchy tunes while strolling along. As much fun as it would have been to keep following them, they were headed in the opposite direction of where more coasters could be found, and those would come from Playland's Castaway Cove. The park reminded me of several smaller parks where rides sit on top of each other, such as Indiana Beach or Hanayashiki, and much of the park looks fairly new. When compared to other parks of its size, it was certainly one of the nicest. Like Casino Pier, the park has 4 coasters, and one that was from SBF was closed, as their SBF Visa Spinner Whirlwind had the dreaded sign at its entrance. This is one of the few parks I'm aware of that has 2 coasters from Myler, including the smaller family coaster that has an oval layout called Pirates Gold Rush. Pirates Gold Rush was the first smaller family Myler coaster I've seen that had a trim brake. The other Myler coaster is one of the few larger full-sized coasters from the company, Wild Waves. This is a prime example of how Myler's larger coasters can make for a great surprise of a ride because they offer some decent airtime, especially with some of the larger hills of the course. Rides like this and the former Scandia Screamer that's being relocated from California to Texas make me hope that other parks will look into adding this model, as it would fit really well with a lot of smaller locations. The star of the park, though, and probably the best coaster of the day, was the unique offering from S&S Sensei, Gale Force. A coaster with a layout similar to Premier Ride's popular Skyrocket 2 model, but in some respects might actually offer a bit more. While the Skyrocket 2 is taller and faster, the layout of this ride makes the airtime on it extreme. This coaster certainly felt like it was doing everything it could to throw its riders out of the park. This was actually some of the most intense airtime I can think of on a coaster its size. There was still time left over to try and get to the final planned stop of the day. Just a bit north in Atlantic City was Steel Pier. This was another park where I focused only on getting the coasters, especially since closing time was near. The first was another SBF creation in Locomotion. That was followed by the final coaster of the night, Crazy Mouse, a Reverchon spinning mouse, which oddly requires 3 riders to run, but one of the operators hopped on with me, and off we went. And this ride really gave some good spinning. It had been a long day with a delayed red-eye flight to get here, and diving right into exploring after landing. But even with a few mishaps and missed credits along the way, it was overall a successful day of coaster seeking. I was happy to manage to get to just about all the parks I was hoping to for that first day, as there would be fewer to worry about the following day. The big question that night, though, what would tomorrow's weather have in store? Thank you for watching this Coasting with Culture video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and click the subscribe button below to see future videos here on YouTube, like these ones which you may enjoy as well. Additional content can be found at coastingwithculture.com, and you can also follow Coasting with Culture on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for announcements, previews, and updates. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, take care and safe travels.